COVID pandemic and the war in Ukraine have been the watershed moments that shattered how we interact with digital content. This shouldn't surprise us anymore, given the accelerating primacy of information warfare in every aspect of our life. My name is Doowan Lee. I'm a member of the Social Media Governance Task Force and also the CEO of venture-backed AI tech company designed to provide scalable solutions to combat disinformation and propaganda. I spent my entire life analyzing and combating extremist and autocratic narratives in the information environment. What used to be confined to national security is affecting all aspects of our life, whether it is political, social, or economical. Let me start with what has not changed about this information warfare. Name me one conflict, one incident where storytelling was not involved. Storytelling is as old as history. That has not changed. It has been a staple of statecraft as long as we can remember. We use storytelling to justify our action, but also to recruit and mobilize audiences toward our political purposes. There has not been any variation in terms of how storytelling intersects with warfare. However, there are qualitative changes. We used to have a finite number of outlets that state actors and non-state actors could leverage to push out specific narratives and stories. As you can imagine, the space has exploded in the past 10 years. On Twitter, we're seeing about 500 new users registered in every 60 seconds. On YouTube, we are looking at about 500 hours of new content uploaded in every 60 seconds. Instagram, about 400 new stories uploaded in every 60 seconds. The volume of this data has surpassed what humans can analyze and essentially ingest. This level of uncertainty is so hard that we do not believe that we can trust what we are seeing online. And this erosion of trust is really what a lot of extremists and also authoritarian regimes have exploited in the information environment. Number two is what I call asymmetry, and that is who can access such data has not been very even. Autocratic regimes have a lot more control over user data. Democratic countries tend to have less control over user data. But it's not just between two nation states or state actors. Even within each country, we have this massive asymmetry about who owns and who controls our data. The inherent openness of this ecosystem has been essentially weaponized by the most authoritarian regimes in the past 10 years. Number three is what I call the primacy of information warfare. How much does it cost to run a disinformation campaign by using or buying hundreds of social media accounts for a week? That's going to cost you about only $10,000. Now, that is essentially employing a full disinformation campaign using essentially commercial accounts to undermine or disrupt somebody else's political process. Only $10,000. What would be most effective, especially for autocratic regimes, to essentially disrupt or attack a democratic country that is literally tens of thousands of miles away? Think about how a lot of conspiracy theories have been able to exploit COVID and how much we have suffered to understand what kind of public health information we should consume in the first place. Essentially, disinformation and misinformation have become these ubiquitous features of both political life and economic life. I think we will see a major degradation of political institutions, economic stability, and social cohesion. So let me discuss some of the strategies available to us to tackle this rapidly expanding problem set. Number one, our typical knee-jerk reaction would be regulation. This is a very common strategy endorsed by a lot of senior policymakers, naturally, but also public scholars. Now, problem is that regulation is important. And I'm a big proponent of establishing guardrails in this massively expanding ecosystem. However, regulation tends to be a little bit too slow, and it takes a lot of consensus formation for it to even happen in the first place. I don't think we can afford that kind of time to tackle this problem set. Number two is also very popular right now, and it's called digital literacy. And that is, if people learn how to exercise critical thinking better, perhaps we can tackle this issue more effectively. We have to also take into account the kind of political environment we are in and think about education policy in our own country that belongs to state or local governments. And it's really hard to have a unifying digital literacy policy when our own country is so polarized at this point. A lot of private companies have used two other strategies to tackle hate speech, online harassment, or what we call CSAM, child sexual abuse materials. So they will use either content moderation or deplatforming. Content moderation is where you analyze certain content, and if the content is harmful, you remove or you de-index so people will not be able to see it as readily. Deplatforming is that if certain account holders violate their internal policies, then essentially you remove their privileges. They cannot post content on a platform or on multiple platforms anymore. We've seen some examples of content moderation and deplatforming in the past, perhaps 2 years or so. However, out of that, this is also a very slippery slope because, I don't think as a democratic country, we should ever systemize, privatize, or commercialize censorship. Another popular strategy that has been used extensively is what we call fact-checking or content authentication. Now, even though this is a very attractive strategy, fundamentally is not very scalable. The reason being, because our country has become so polarized, now we have left-wing fact-checkers, we have right-wing fact-checkers. Simply put, fact-checking itself has become weaponized to invalidate the other side's content. And there is this strategy that we haven't considered very much, and I call it essentially going back to the principles of what we value the most as a country, as a society, and that is empowering the individual again. And that is what I call promoting information integrity. And to me, this is really about putting guardrails back into the information environment, just making the origin, the composition, the nature of this content transparent and readily available for the individual to use to make the right decision. For example, where did this story come from in the first place? What are some of the foreign accounts or media outlets that have amplified this story, and so on and so forth? As long as we make what we call the provenance of digital content transparent and available to the individual, we essentially let the individual make better decisions about what to consume online. This way, we're not censoring anyone's voice. We're not removing everyone's right for free speech. This is really fundamental to how we can promote information integrity without undermining the principles that underpin what we are as a country and as a society. It's not a foreign policy issue anymore. It's also about our social cohesion and economic vitality. This impacts everyone at this point. It has come home in 2022. Now, this is a big, massive conflict, and we've been fighting this the wrong way. Given that extremists and authoritarian regimes have mobilized tens of thousands of bots, trolls, sock puppets, or hijacked accounts to undermine democratic processes elsewhere, I think we need to bring scale back to this fight. During the Cold War era, a lot of small countries had the same issue of numbers, and they had to come up with this novel strategy they call civilian defense or total defense. Let's match numbers with numbers. Where do we find our strongest asset? And that force lies in civil society, and that is we need to essentially mobilize what we call public-private partnership in order to bring scale back to information warfare. My name is Doowan Lee. With scale and transparency on our side, we can win this fight. We can make disinformation irrelevant again.